Awesome. We're live, huh?
Yeah, I think we are. We're live somewhere.
Okay.
We're live somewhere. Oh, wow.
Excellent.
We have people trickling in
Uh,
already.
yeah, I'm already seeing some questions from Sid Mohan in chat. So, welcome everyone. This is a monthly webinar that we've had since September. Um, Initially, it was because of the H-1B 100K news that came out back in September, and we had hundreds of people join in back then. But this webinar is really focused on we want to talk about the O-1 as an alternative to the H-1B. However, our main goal is to address any questions you have on whatever is going on in your life right now. So, as you're joining in, welcome and please start putting in your questions in the chat box. It gives us a very good idea of what is the pulse of the room. Where should we focus more time on and less time on? So, for anyone who's just joining in, welcome. We have this monthly webinar, and please put your questions in the chat box. We will get to all of them by the end of the hour. Excellent. How are you doing, Nicole? There's been a lot of news that's come out the last week, and I'm sure it's very busy for you. So, how's it been?
100%. You would think that with this upcoming holiday season, with December rolling in, that it's like the low of our season, and then we pick everything back up towards like the H-1B cap season coming up. But that is like the opposite of true. I feel like it's not that we're rolling with the punches. I think it's just like we're always waiting for like the latest thing to come out, right? Even today alone, you have more countries on this quote unquote visa ban. And then what's going to happen tomorrow, right? Now it's going to be $10,000 proclamation for an L1. I'm not saying that that's real. I'm just saying like I'm just always waiting for like the next thing to come.
Yeah, I don't think they'll give you a break during the holidays. So, you're probably going to be working through some of the holidays next 2 weeks.
Oh, 100%. I'm actually very prepared for it. I think you would be proud of me, Soundarya. I have a travel kit now so
Oh,
that when I go to different places, I can film and I can be on these webinars wherever I go. So we're ready for it just in case.
oh man. I mean, when do you get the actual work done? Because you're always just telling people this is what's happening.
I think,
Anyways,
yeah, like there's a lot of ways, right? But here I am trying to do it all.
um, so I'm already seeing questions in the chat box. To everyone who just joined, welcome. We do this webinar once a month, and make sure to put your questions in the chat box. We will get to all of them by the end of the hour. Um, Before we begin, I just wanted to quickly introduce Nicole, and I'm just going to share my screen. All right, let me know if you can see it, Nicole, from your side.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we have Nicole from Manifest Law. She has 7+ years of experience. And Nicole, do you specialize in talent visas specifically? Because I see that over here as a focus area.
Yeah, I do focus a lot on talent visas, but I think what people like to think is my superpower is that I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot across different boards because a lot of my background has been advising anywhere from high net worth individuals who just want an answer, right? It doesn't matter what it is I need to figure out an answer, all the way to like multinational companies that are really looking for creative solutions to make them outcompete the traditional models that maybe a Meta or an Open AI would have. So having like that breadth of experience has really helped me in figuring out a lot of like the nuances that can make something that seems very normal or very superficial into a very sophisticated and very compelling case in a short period of time.
Okay, perfect. Because I'm already seeing a lot of questions on the O1, EB1, NIW in the chat box. But before we start, I'm going to kick off with the first question from Sid Mohan, which is all about the latest news on H-1B. Sid is asking, how will the latest announcement on LinkedIn verification or social media verification for H-1B renewals work? On what basis can the H-1B renewal be denied based on someone's LinkedIn profile? So some context is they came out and said about a week ago that they'll be doing extensive social media vetting for anyone who's going through these processes, especially H-1Bs and H-4s. So what's the answer to that? Even I'm curious.
Right. So there's like a two-part answer to this. So the first one is how will it work, right? I think the government is probably going to use whether it's like sophisticated tools or even traditional tools to figure out what you're actually saying on LinkedIn. Could it be a manual search? You have a USCIS officer who actually goes to your profile and reads it? Yes, right? Or is it that they're going to use like software, let's say, to pull all of this data that a lot of us have already utilized, right? But taking like that step back very quickly, when you ask that question also of what basis can the H-1B renewal be denied based on a LinkedIn profile, the easiest one that comes across the mind is fraud and willful misrepresentation, right? When you tell the government in your initial H-1B, I'm going to be a graphic designer, right? But on your LinkedIn, you say I'm the CTO of like this company here in the United States, right? That is an incongruency. That is like you are telling the world that you are doing one thing, but you told the government that you're doing something completely different. So which is true, right? So I can see the basis of a denial being, well, we feel like you've violated your status, you've committed some level of fraud. You're not actually working for company XYZ as ABC. You are doing something that is completely different from what you have said, right? So I do think that that could be one sense of a basis, but there could be other things as well that come up on your LinkedIn. What are some of the posts that you are liking? What are some of the posts that you are reposting? Remember that there's this huge move by the government about what we call national security, right? You are taking actions that they feel are dangerous to the country. What that definition looks like seems to differ on which administration is in place, but this is not necessarily the time to have, let's call it, the most controversial of opinions as well.
I was actually going to ask you about that. That if someone merely posts about breaking news that's happening out there and just mentions the word Trump, would that be detrimental for them?
I don't think that alone will be enough. I think it's definitely much more focused on, like, I'll give you an example. Like, recently, we've been hearing a lot of this conversation about how they want to know who's working in fact checking or who's working in content moderation and all these kinds of things, right? So, if you're regularly involved in that kind of content moderation, it does raise that question to them, whether it's in their perspective a national security issue. Are you pointing to a specific agenda? Are you pointing to a specific thing, right? Like, it's hard for us to demarcate the lines because we know these things are happening, but the government hasn't established like the boundaries, right, of what exactly they're looking for. And it's going to be a case of first impression. I do know that some firms and some organizations have FOIA'd the government. So that's a Freedom of Information Act request where we ask the government to deliver materials about a specific subject or item. I know some people have FOIA'd for what this template or what this RFE or the grounds of denial would look like if they were to find something negative on your social media. As of now, it takes time for those things to resolve, to get those documents to us for review. But right now, it's all a case of first impression.
Okay. So just to summarize, definitely don't misrepresent what you do. Meaning, if you're going to say that you're a graphic designer, make sure your LinkedIn says that you're a graphic designer. And also stay away maybe from controversial topics that seem against US national interest or anti-American. Is that a fair summary?
I think that would be a fair summary. Like, essentially, this is where kind of focusing LinkedIn on just like your work and being very congruent with your application is probably the best thing that you could be doing at the moment.
Okay, good. I'm going to ask a follow-up question to that came out just now from Ritik Gupta. I'm stuck in India due to the cancellation. A lot of people, at least I know 3,000 people, a friend of mine told me, are on Telegram and WhatsApp groups figuring out what to do because their appointments from December got pushed to April, May, June, July of next year. Ritik says, my company is figuring out how I can work from India for 6 to 7 months. Is that good? And also, do we have any idea when these cancellations would stop?
Right. So I'm sorry to hear that, right? To, of course, to our audience and anybody that you know that's going through that. It's horrible because the traditional methods of curing it, like going to third country appointments, right? Let's fly to Singapore. You can go there or go to another country. Sorry, there might be noise in the background. But there, that doesn't like really exist anymore under the current administration that says that you need to process in your home country or country of residence. The first thing that I would check for is, let's say you are married, right? And your spouse needs to also do visa stamping, but they're a dual citizen of another country. You can claim their jurisdiction to make that adjudication as well because you're the spouse as well. The second thing that I would also mention is to kind of really consider submitting an expedite request if there is a legitimate business continuity need to get you in sooner. I think a lot of people are scared of an expedite request. They're already historically told that they are going to be canceled, they're going to be denied. You don't really know that until you try. And if you come up with a really legitimate business reason, there needs to be some sort of tangible negative to like what would occur if you don't return to the United States, maybe in the next month or the next 2 months. But when you say it's that, is it that good, or is that the only thing that can do is how to work from India? There are a lot of companies out there that focus on what we call offshoring, where you get moved to another country that is closer in time zone to the US organization that you work for. I think this is a time where a lot of people have to advocate for themselves in their role, right? If a lot of people are concerned that, are they going to keep my job? Like, if I'm going to be gone so far. So it's important to come with your own solutions and say, you know what? I can still be in the same time zone. It's not going to be that far different. I will be in this other country while I wait. That does exist. There's companies like Mob Squad that I've heard of where they do offshoring specifically in Canada. They help you get to Canada and they help you kind of exist.
Interesting. Okay, so yeah, I'm aware of Mob Squad. For those who don't know, it's MOB Squad. They essentially, interesting one, because they connect you with a company in Canada that will hire you, so you can stay in Canada, uh, while you still work for, I guess, your US employer. So that's what you're saying, is you could do that. And Canada is the closest one in terms of time zone. It's same time zone as the US almost. So
Correct. And there's similar like other countries that are in like whether it's like the West Coast or the East Coast side of like the time zones or even the Midwest, right? So I think my call to action is not even really an immigration one. It's very much like focusing on figuring out what solutions can you yourself as an employee present to your employer rather than unilaterally relying on your employer to come with those solutions. We're living at a time where being resourceful is important, and you also have a lot of knowledge base that's available on the internet to kind of figure out something or another. So don't feel like you're sequestered and you must physically stay in India for 6 and 7 months. There's actually a lot of, let's call it novel solutions or complex solutions that can give your, let's call it employer some ease while you are gone.
One solution you mentioned is to move to a similar time zone, another country. Another solution is check if your spouse's if they have dual citizenship, or if they're from a different country, that you could claim that country for.
Essentially, yeah, because the way that I think about it is that the spouse's jurisdiction is going to be captured by that second country. Let's say it's a dual citizen of Italy, right? So go to Italy, say that it's all my spouse needs to get a spousal visa. I also need to get my H-1B visa. So let's go together, right?
Okay. Is there a third solution that I forgot? You said something about expedition.
Yeah, the third solution is basically asking for an expedite, right? Which is that you need to be able to put very eloquently, usually in a one paragraph submission, very much like, hey, like there's a reason why I need an appointment sooner rather than later, and here's why. It can't just be like, I need to be back in the United States ASAP because I left my stuff there, right? Things like that. It needs to be like, hey, my business relies on me to be in the United States. If I'm not in the United States, we're going to lose a $15 million deal. 10 people are going to be out of their jobs, all this kind of stuff, right? So it's just like the more tangible the negative impact is and that you can prove it, the more likely they may adjudicate this expedite in your favor.
And how do you, last question on this, who do you send this request to? Like, what kind of a form do you have to fill for this exactly?
It's usually inside of your portal. There's usually a button that you can hit when you are allowed to request an expedite. But I've also been successful in requesting expedites through the contact form. So every consulate may have like a contact form that you can submit from, and you can say, I'm in this kind of negative situation at the moment. I need to be in the United States ASAP, right? This is the reason why. And you may get a scenario where the officer is able to go into the system and submit that request. I think the
Okay.
reason why it's hard for me to advise specifically for India or a variety of countries is it depends on which system you're using. There's US visa scheduling now, there's AIS portals and things like that, but there is a mechanism to do expedites for every single one of these consulates.
Okay. Okay. All right. We're gonna move on to O1, talking about O1 and EB1 because there's a lot of questions. But one last question on this topic is Sri Raksha is asking, I've been in India for 5 weeks, came here to get my visa stamped and got it approved and stamped before these new rules kicked in. So thank God you got it stamped in the exact last moment. Will I be scrutinized when I travel back this Saturday?
So, whenever you enter the United States, you're always subject to some level of review, right? So, it's not like once you have the visa stamp and you walk through the passport control once you land in the United States that suddenly you're just home free no matter what, right? A CBP officer is also extended into this vetting as well. They could technically look you up, they can make sure that whatever your LinkedIn is or whatever it is that you've done lines up with whatever you argued for the H-1B. But is it going to be the same level and extent as, let's say, the DOS processes or even ultimately the USCIS processes? In my experience, no, but it's still an open question. So, what does that mean for you? It means that you need to be prepared, right? Your social media should be congruent or should make sense alongside whatever you declared as your H-1B, right? Don't settle in your laurels just because you've been approved for the stamp. Remember that you are opening yourself up to an inquiry every time you come in. Maybe not as intensive, but one that they can quickly Google you just to double check and make sure.
Okay, so the short answer is, I mean, you don't have to be concerned for something extra, but be concerned just as anyone who's entering the US. Make sure that whatever you say online you do is what you do, and it's all up to date. So it's just the same level of concern that anyone should have when they're entering the country. Okay. Awesome. So there's a lot of questions coming in, and I just want to repeat for anyone who just joined. So far, we've talked about all the H-1B news that's come up in the last 2 weeks around social media wedding, canceling appointments in India, and so on. Now we'll move on to talking about specifically the two talent visas that you guys are all curious about, which is the O-1 and EB1. First of all, Nicole, can you give a very, very brief intro to what's the O-1 and who should be looking at it?
Okay. So the O-1 visa is an extraordinary ability visa, right? Sometimes in the market, people say it's the Einstein visa or the genius visa. But I think the better way to think about it is that the government is trying to provide a pathway for individuals who are highly achieved within their fields. To qualify for this O-1 visa, this work visa that rewards you for being highly achieved, they actually have specific criteria for individuals who are in the sciences, education, business, or athletics, which is the O1A. And they also have a series of criteria that's for the O1B, for individuals who are in the creatives or like the arts, generally speaking. The goal is that you need to meet at least 3 of these criteria that the government has laid out. And if you meet at least 3, then congratulations, you should qualify for an O1. But just to make it very clear, an O1 is a work visa. It's a non-immigrant visa. And if you get it approved, you can get up to 3 years in the United States to work for a specific petitioner, so a specific employer, or multiple employers through an agent petition.
Okay, excellent. So recapping, O1 is just like the H-1B. It's a work visa, temporary work visa, but you don't have to go through a lottery.
Yep.
You don't have to specifically make a minimum wage for this, which is good for founders. And you can technically keep renewing it after the first 3 years. You said they give it for 3 years, and then can you renew it forever?
There is no limit to an O1. So it's not like the H-1B that has this 6-year limit unless you have like a green card process ongoing to a certain point. But the O-1 essentially doesn't have that. You can keep renewing it for 1 to 3 year periods at a time until forever and more.
Amazing. So now there's a lot of questions on, I guess the people we have are pretty knowledgeable on what these visas are, and they even know the criteria. So we can jump straight into the criteria for these visas. Question from Sid. For O1 slash EB1, and for those who don't know, EB1 is similar to the O1 in terms of the criteria, but it's really a pathway to a green card. It's not a work visa like the O1. So the question is, what would be considered a high salary for an electronics engineer in the Bay Area based upon your past experience or interactions? Is $150,000 eligible? So one of the criteria in the O1 is high remuneration slash salary. The question is, how much do I have to make to satisfy that as an electronics engineer in the Bay Area?
So the funny thing is that there isn't really like a demarcation line that is out there other than looking at a specific series of databases and trying your best to be above, let's call it the top 10%, right? So when you're asking me electronics engineer in the Bay Area, I'm not going to base it on past experience. I'm actually going to base it on the government data. So people can actually go to a website, and I usually tell people to go to the ONET, ONET. The ONET is a supplement to the Occupational Outlook Handbook. And what you can do on the ONET is that you can plug in, let's call it your job, right? In this case, it's electronics engineer. You're probably going to find the closest match to it. It's going to be like electrical engineer or maybe hardware engineer. You click the one that matches the most to your role, and you can actually go to the wages category, type in your zip code, and it will actually give you a graph chart of the government's data on what the top 10% of your field is making at this moment, right?
Mm.
It's a good start because the government, even though I'm presenting them their own data, sometimes wants more data. Maybe it's like in your specific industry, because an electronics engineer is not just an electronics engineer for every industry in the world. Sometimes you're specific to semiconductors. Maybe you're specific to being part of like, something related to greenhouse gases or like sustainable energy, right? There's more ways to kind of carve your niche and prove that you're at the very top of your field for that niche. But it's a good start because you're in the top 10%. That's a good argument to work with.
Awesome. So once again, to Sid, the answer is check out ONET, ONET. Go there, type in your role, electronic, and find the closest equivalent to the role, and then look at the graph based on the zip code. Because that's the good thing about the high salary criteria is are you making in the top 10% of people in your role and location? So you won't be compared if you're, let's say, staying in Texas against someone staying in the Bay Area, because the Bay Area obviously will be making more on average.
100%.
So, okay. Excellent. The next question I'm seeing is from Sajmaru, or Saj. I'll call you Saj. How do I determine which media outlets are strong enough to count as solid O1 evidence? Are platforms like Tech Times, Analytics Insight, or Benzinga considered strong or weak for the criteria? I'm assuming that Saj probably has some things published in these outlets. So the question is, how do I determine which media outlets are strong enough? So media is one of the criteria. Once again, it's over here, number 3. Press about you in professional or major trade publications or major media. Now the question is, what is considered major media besides the usual ones like Forbes and Fortune and so on?
So I think one thing before we even dive into what makes, something solid, let's call it like something solid, something that's not weak, right? Is to actually think about the fact that the government doesn't expect you to only have major media. They do accept trade media or trade publications, right? The reality is that, just because something only has 50,000 subscribers, right? doesn't mean that it's not good enough for the government, because they accept that if it's influential within your trade, it's something that a lot of people within your field follow, you can successfully argue it. So don't feel pressure that you need to get on CNN, that you need to get on Forbes, that you need to get onto these big heavy hitters that you've heard of, when you should be focusing on maybe publications that you yourself in your industry have followed or have read, because that's what your field usually does, even if it's a small population. Um, but when you're showing me like platforms like Tech Times, Analytics Insight, or Bazinga, I think the first question you need to ask yourself is, how easy was it for me to get into these publications, right? It shouldn't be superbly easy or guaranteed that you're going to be published, right? Because if you truly are being, publicized, right? Whether it's your own writing or whether it's someone is interviewing for press materials, there should be some sort of editorial process that was involved with it. If it comes with a guarantee, I paid $50 in exchange, I'm going to be published tomorrow, it's almost too good to be true. And it's been sold to a lot of other people that are out there.
Okay, that's an interesting point, Nicole. So many questions. So there is paid press out there where people can pay and even get into places like Forbes and Business Insider. I mean, you'd have to pay a lot of money, but I think it's still possible that you can get it. So is that the main litmus test? Is that, hey, if you paid for it, then it's not going to count? Or do they care about things like how many people read this outlet? How many people visit the website on a monthly basis? How reputed is this in your field?
So I do think that those are really enough separate questions, right? Because the first set of questions that you asked, which is pay for play good enough? I think the government is getting smarter about it. I think several months ago, there was a lot of press and a lot of, let's call it news within immigration, about some of the RFEs that were coming out, which is that they've been hearing that certain publications are quid pro quo. I exchange a favor in exchange for payment and we're going to cover you, right? And essentially, the government is figuring out that there are ways for people to invest money to get this done. But there's a big difference between, let's say, I paid for guaranteed placement. Here's $3,000 and I'm guaranteed LA Weekly, New York Weekly, and Business Insider in France or something like that, right? Versus I paid $3,000 for a legitimate PR firm who says our contract ends, right, when you have 3 publications about you, but we're going to go through a manual pitching process. I'm going to put you into a database as an expert in X, Y, and Z. We're going to probably draft a few tidbits about your subject area and examples of things that you can talk about. And naturally, the press will come in, whether it's through being placed in the right organizations or in those right databases, like I mentioned. And again, goes back to an editorial process. Where things don't work is when you are guaranteed that placement, because the government has RFE'd on this before. And they have pushed back very strongly, especially in the EB1A category, compared to maybe the O-1.
Interesting, because now I'm thinking, let's say I actually got the press legitimately. I reached out, or a journalist reached out to me from LA Times, and they wrote this article about me. But there's someone else who got it through payment. But how would the government ever know that I am legitimate, but maybe this other person is not?
Sometimes it's a matter of like trends, because there's very specific publications that have sold way more than the organic way that they've done it. But I will say that there are indicators, right? For example, let's say you got published by an organization. It needs to have a journalist's name on the author line versus, let's say, the organization's name, or if it says outside content or paid content or sponsored content, right? It should be by somebody's name, right? And if it isn't, and it instead says, I'm going to use Tech Times as an example, not to say that Tech Times is bad or not, it's just an example. If it says by Tech Times, right? Or if it says by sponsored content, that is already an indicator, because they're going to try to maintain an editorial difference between yourself, right? Between their kind of opinion versus like the paid opinions, let's call it.
Okay, so a good indicator is make sure that there's a journalist name attached, a date attached to the article that is being written about you. And also, if a journalist did reach out to you and it was all organic, you can always show screenshots and prove that there was no payment involved. So
Exactly.
So, okay, hopefully we answered your question, Saj. And if you have a follow-up on that, please ask us in the chat. There is a follow-up from, there's two follow-ups I wanted to ask. Saj has a follow-up on the high salary criteria that we just talked about. Does the data on ONET showing base salary or total comp includes RSUs and bonuses? Great question, because it's high remuneration, which includes bonus and RSUs and stock options likely. But does the data on ONET, does it show the total compensation?
It doesn't really show the total compensation. If anything, what it does show is usually what is reflected on the first box of your W-2s, right? So depending on how you do kind of like the RSUs or how you do your compensation, it could be reflected on the W-2. But if not, just assume for argument's sake, it's like your base salary that's being juxtaposed, right? It's harder for the government to take into consideration total compensation against their own government metrics, right? So if you are going to argue, let's say you're a founder, you take a very small base salary because you don't want to take the cash flow out of your business. However, you took a lot of equity. At the end of the year, you have this massive funding round and you're valued at an amazing amount. And now your shares are worth X amount of money, right? Whatever it is, right? So long as you have a tangible data point, it's an argument that can be made, right? You have to prove that the funding round occurred, or even better at, let's say you work for a public company, then you can just point to the stock ticker and be like, that's the value of my shares, and this is the shares that I got this year. That is part of my compensation, right? So there needs to be a tangible data point in order to value your shares and your RSUs. That's number one. And number two, the comparison point. You should be using websites like levels.fyi or databases that do take into account those other forms of compensation to benchmark yourself. Top 10%, top 15% is a good start.
Okay. To summarize, ONET does not show total comp, but you can check levels.fyi or other databases that do take into account these total comp. But regardless, I get to share my total comp when I'm putting forth the evidence, meaning I can share my W-2 plus RSUs plus anything else as bonus that I got. Right?
Yep. Accurate.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. I see a question from Obid Kai Fo. You mentioned it was too narrow. What does that mean? Do courts care about that? I don't understand what that question is. So if you don't mind repeating that with more context on what is it in that sentence? Unless you know, Nicole, what they're talking about.
You mentioned it was too narrow. What does that mean? I don't remember saying the word narrow. That's the reason I'm trying to think about like what do I mean by narrow.
Just repeat the question again, please. All right. Now talking about media, that's a question from NQ that says, it's a great question actually. If your media mentions your work but not your full name explicitly, does it count towards the criteria? If you can prove you worked on it through email screenshots and so on.
So if you look at the guidances, they actually mention these items. They actually talk about what it looks like even if you're not mentioned. In my experience, the more corroborative evidence that you can, or if other members are mentioned in the media piece and those members are the ones writing your letters of recommendation that explicitly say that you're a part of it, you were a really strong component, and even are, better yet, able to explain why your name wasn't included, right, in a very like wonderful fashion, it would be great. It is possible. But no matter what, I think Soundarya, if I'm being honest with like a lot of people in your crowd, the strongest piece of evidence will always be that your name was even put into it in some form or way. But don't lose hope. You can make the argument win. And actually, if you go to the O-1 guidances, they even tell you exactly what they're looking for. So if you model after it, you're in a better spot.
Awesome. So you can. So the answer to your question, NQ, is you can use it as long as you can corroborate through letters from your manager, email screenshots, or ideally letters from the person who is mentioned in the article, perhaps. Awesome. I'm going to move on to a kind of a slightly different question that I think is Fasijani is asking. This is about the critical capacity criteria, and I think if the employer is not willing to provide company-related information such as customer names, project details for critical role, with only job description and offer letter, can I fulfill the criterion? So this is a common problem when you work for, say, companies like Apple. They want everything to be sealed and confidential, and they don't let you talk about what you're doing. What do I do in that case?
So I think this has always been like a challenge, especially when I've done applications for people who are consultants, right? If you're working at like a McKinsey and you're working at a Bain, you're actually in a worse position than the one working at Apple, right? Because you've signed a bajillion NDAs, more so than anyone else, because you can't take credit for half of the work that you did for another company, right? Now, what is like my resolution for this? I think don't pigeonhole yourself to just I only have the offer letter and I only have the job description. Have you thought about getting these letters of recommendation? So hear me out. You don't have to necessarily get a letter from someone who's currently working at your organization. You can get a letter from someone who worked with you at some point while you were at that organization. They have maybe left the company since then, and they're willing to put it on their personal letterhead, along with some evidence to show that you work together. And they're able to say, maybe not to the fullest extent of every project detail because it's confidential, but they're willing to kind of express how critical you were to the organization, vaguely mention what they're doing, and also support the argument that because of the nature of your business, a lot of it is confidential, right? So another key example is what I was saying for consultants. There was a lot of evidence that we could show that in the industry, NDAs are normal. Consultants have a very difficult time expressing what makes them so amazing or what makes them so good. But if you're able to at least prove to an officer who's honestly a human being as well, that no, like you were high enough in the company that you did vaguely X, Y, and Z without exactly naming what that X, Y, and Z is, right? And you show that proof that it is common in your industry to not have this information, it can make for a compelling case. It is still a nuanced case though, because you're not going to have the best proof of all time. You're going to have like let's call it like a circle that should have been a square. And you're trying your best to like smash it into that square.
Okay. So get it from someone who left the company, who can talk about some of the things that someone who's currently existing cannot talk about. That's
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Awesome. I'm going to break straight for just a moment to ask a question on the H-1B 100K fee. And then we'll get back to the EB1 and O-1 again. So please keep your questions on the criteria coming. Any questions you have? Pratik is asking, is the H-1B 100K fee implementation really paused now because of a lawsuit? If so, how long can we expect it to remain paused? Some context here. Recently, 20 states in the US have sued the administration for the H-1B 100K fee, saying that it's unlawful and they have their own reasons for it. So as of now, it's still going through the court process. So Nicole, what does that mean? Is it paused? Will it be implemented in 2026?
So as far as I'm aware, I know that the lawsuit exists, but I
Oops, I think we lost Nicole there. Can you guys still hear her? Because I'm not able to hear her on my side. Nicole? All right, we're going to wait for her to come back. In the meantime, I'm just going to go through and see if I can help with any of the questions with my very limited knowledge. Let me just check through this. Okay, thanks for saying, Fasij. Thank you so much. Oh,
Hi.
all right.
Sorry guys, I don't know what happened. Like my screen like went blank, so I have to rejoin the screen. So
I was dreading that I have to answer the questions like you, but I don't have to. So great. So we were talking about the H-1B fee, 100K fee. Is it really paused right now?
yeah, so as far as I'm aware, the lawsuit happened, but I don't think an injunction was filed yet. I don't think an injunction was ever really issued, right? I think where people are getting a little bit conflated is that people are still kind of confused on who qualifies for this 100K fee and who doesn't qualify. And as the news talks about the 100K and they start kind of really parsing out the details that not that many people are actually impacted by the 100K, it feels like an injunction happened because tied to that news cycle is the actual unpacking of where the guidance stands today. right? So that has been my understanding. I don't see any news related to an actual injunction. I just know that the legal challenge was filed about 4 days ago, and that the courts will be hearing it soon, and it could net result in an injunction pretty soon, because it's a big difference to be sued by, let's call it, an association of companies, right? Or a
Yeah.
grouping of companies versus the states themselves. But correct me if I'm wrong. Like, that's what I see from Reuters, is that I do not see an injunction was actually issued.
I don't remember seeing that in the article I read, but once again, you probably know better than me.
For sure.
Okay, so as of now, it's not paused yet, but there's a good chance it could be, given that people are putting so much effort into filing this lawsuit. That, yeah, just wait and see, because as you can see, just within the last 2 months, so much happened in this whole ruling. It came out, and then they clarified some things within 48 hours because it wasn't clear, and then they clarified more within a week, and now this lawsuit was filed. So there's a lot happening back to back. All right, going back to the criteria now. There's a question from Fasih that says, if my original contribution, so original contribution is one of the criteria, once again. In fact, I would say it's one of the most important ones, because if you've done something truly original in your field, a lot of the other things are slightly easier in terms of, say, getting press on it, getting a high salary for it, and so on. So the question is, if my original contribution is in telecommunication standard 3GPP for cellular device, can I use these in authorship criterion as well?
So I think it depends on like what the net end product was, right? Because you're saying that it's a telecommunication standard. I am by no means an SME in what a telecommunication standard is, right? Although I have worked with telecommunication experts before. When you're arguing the authorship criterion, what the government is looking for is that there was some sort of editorial process that occurred, right? It went through some sort of function where a group of people or an individual or a process reviewed it in some, let's call it like high level scholarly fashion. And then the end product was a publication that was for other industry experts to review, right? So there's an element of publishing, like something was generated and published somewhere. There was a reviewing process that occurred before that publishing occurred. And when it was published, it went to industry experts, right? If that equation lines up, right? And let's say the publication is truly one that is a trade publication within your field, there could be an argument for authorship. But I do think it depends on what is this 3GPP, right? Where did like this standard go, or is it just on a computer somewhere, uploaded somewhere, and it never went through a reviewing process? I don't really know.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say the same thing, is that for authorship, I submitted authorship for my O-1 application and my NIW. And those were all because I had published articles in newspapers and publications out there that went through an editorial process. I worked with a journalist or an editor who reached out to me, or I might have reached out to them, and they asked me for a draft. They reviewed it, and then finally they published after some time. So we have that back and forth going on.
Right.
Um, all right. I'm not seeing any more specifically questions on O1 EB1 come up, but once again, we still have about 15 minutes. So if you have questions on the criterion and how you can meet that in your specific scenario, ask that. I'm going to move on to a slightly different topic once again, Nicole. Going back to, okay, Ashwini has a question on H-1B. I am impacted. My project was changed due to H-1B, and I'm stuck in India right now. My perm is being processed. Do I still have to pay the 100K?
So I think my question to you before I even answer like the 100K, right? Is it that you're stuck in India because your job changed and you're not able to lawfully come back because you don't have a new approval notice with a new employer because you're no longer with your old one, right? Or there was a significant material change? Or is it that you're stuck in India because you can't get a visa stamping appointment because of the cancellations or it got moved into the future, right? And your perm is still being processed. I don't really know if that's even relevant to the 100K kind of question, right? So Ashwini, what you need to actually find out is it that you're not able to come back to the United States and file a change of status or not. Because if you're not able to change your status or re-enter back into your H-1B, and you don't have like a valid existing stamp to do that, that's where the 100K fee comes in. The 100K fee comes in when you're seeking a brand new application for consular notification, right? That's the point where the government asks you to prove that payment because it's considered, let's call it a brand new application, even though you're using your remaining time on the H-1B because you're outside of the United States without a valid visa stamp.
Nicole, I think Ashwini responded right away. They said, I used all H-1B 6 years.
I see. This is definitely like a nuanced situation because I am curious about how long has, like, where are you in the perm process? How long has it been pending? Can I try to make an AC-21 one-year extension rule to just try to get you back into the country in some form or way? Or is it that it wouldn't count as a change of status because you can still lawfully enter, trigger the 60-day grace period, and then I try to buy you time while you're in the United States or recapture, right? But if it's that you have used all 6 years, right? And you don't have a way to do an AC-21 extension, then the 100K fee does apply unless you have a way to come back to the United States and then effectuate a change of status once you get here, right? Consider so 2 months is not enough. So Ashwini, I think you might have just run out of time. Like you only have, you said you use all of your 6 years, right? You've only had 2 months on the perm so far. So that removes you from the 1-year extension provision. You can only get the 3-year extension provision if the I-140 is approved. So the only way that you can come back is to either win a brand new lottery, right? That gives you a brand new fresh 6-year period. Or if you wanted to come back to the United States in a different visa first. My employer wanted to wait for perm, so they didn't want to file AC-21 before September 100K rule. They wanted to wait for the 3-year extension. It's unclear. I think you meant 2 months left on the perm decision. This is where sometimes like seeking outside counsel, even just for a legal questions call to just kind of get a better understanding of where you are in your immigration journey can be helpful. Because ultimately, even though your employer is kind of there to help you, remember that the lawyers are beholden to the employer's position, right? It doesn't hurt for you to get a second opinion. Think about going to like a doctor's office, right? Just to be like, what do you think about this? Because your specific scenario is so specific to you, and we need to know more in order for me to be able to honestly advise you on like what can even be done in this context.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on because I do think, Ashwini, this is a very specific scenario, and you should just reach out to Nicole directly via email. Nicole, is it just nicole@manifestlaw.com?
Actually, honestly, the best way to reach me, because someone accidentally publicized all of my email addresses, is to go through our helpline, which is help@manifestlaw.com. Not only will they connect you, whether it's to me, but honestly, the most appropriate attorney who can parse this out, and maybe even specifically in your industry.
Right. Okay. I'm seeing a few questions come in on the NIW. Even I'm curious about this. So 2 people asked. Josiel asked, how long can an NIW process take? And Sid asked again as a follow-up, the NIW rejection rates are extremely high. Even I've been hearing that this whole year. Further to this, the processing times are increasing manifold. So is it futile to file for NIW till 2028?
So when it comes to the question of how long can an EB2 NIW process take, that's such a loaded question, right? Do you mean like how long does it take to put together and then file, and how long does the processing time takes, right? How long it takes to put together an EB2 NIW actually kind of depends on like the starting base, right? I've met so many people who are so well prepared, Soundarya. They have all of these folders, all these files, they're like ready to go. And then it makes my job as an attorney way easier because I can cycle it out 2 weeks, 4 weeks. Like it just kind of depends on what you start with, right? But for those who are starting from scratch, where it's like, let's work on the endeavor statement. Like, what is even like the definition of your endeavor? Like, how do you even define what you're planning on doing in the United States, right? That means that I have to kind of really take the time to iron those details out strategy-wise. So it can take like 1, 2, maybe even 3 months to put together a really good EB2NIW application if there's more to work on. Once it's filed, it goes from there.
Okay, I was actually going to ask. Maybe the question here is how long will it take after filing? So I know NIW has premium processing, which has to take up to 45 days. Correct?
Yes, yes, it's 45 business days now. It's
Business
not
days.
calendar days. Yeah, so it'll take a while to get an answer, but it's still at least you know a deadline.
Okay, so the other question Sid asked is the rejection rates are going up by a lot. Are you seeing that on your side?
So I will say that Manifest still maintains like above the national average. The national average at the moment, I think it's about like 65%. I think my recollection is off, but it'd be like in the 60%, which is a lot lower than in like previous quarters or previous years. And you're talking about like even the height of like the Biden administration approving anything that said STEM on it at one point, right? But yeah, we are seeing a downward turn, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible. We're still able to win these cases, but if I could at least very briefly, Sundaria, pinpoint like the one thing that has really changed that I think has actually caused that spike in denials, right? Is that the government is nowadays looking for way more evidence to show that whatever you're proposing, right, whatever your endeavor is, let's say you're going to cure cancer, right, you're going to cure some type of cancer, is actually going to happen, right? So that needle that makes them believe more likely than not that this is going to hit the national scale, it's going to nationally benefit the United States, is now much higher, because they're like, okay, instead of before where you could say, here's my business plan, here's my projections, thank you very much. Now it's like, okay, you have the business plan, but like, do you have letters of intent? Do you have the money? Where are you going to get the money? Like, do you have proof that you're going to be able to get it into the right hands of the right doctors so that it's going to get that national scale? That is the level of evidence that they're looking for compared to before.
Okay, so the reason for the denial rates are overshooting so much is just because they're expecting too much, more than before at least. For because even though the NIW is more about future potential, you're saying that they're also looking for past accomplishments.
It's
For
past accomplishments speak strongly to your ability to do your future, but even more than your past is that if you're going to tell them prospectively, this is going to happen, the line of that whether or not it's more likely to happen than not is now much farther away. It's very much like you really need to prove that roadmap. You need to be able to show
right.
that the future can happen.
Okay. All right. We're ending the last 10 minutes, so I'm gonna first pick up Sri Raksha's question. Then I'm going to pick up Akshat. I know you've asked a question, and I'm sorry we didn't get to that. Akshat's question next. And finally, we'll end with Saj's question on multiple contributions. If there's any other questions, quickly put it in the chat. We'll breeze through the next 10 minutes. So, Sri Raksha's question is this is the person who said that they're coming back to the United States on Saturday and they have the H-1B stamped. The question is, when I travel to the US on Saturday, should I make my social media public? Thank you so much.
Yeah. I know that sounds so strange, right? Because even I myself, my social media is private. Like, it's not because I have something to hide. It's because like I like having like my own kind of community, my own little circle that sees my life. I don't need to necessarily share it with the broader public. But the way that we've been seeing the questions come up, whether it's from the officers at the borders or the officers at the port of entries, is that they're like, why are you hiding it? What do you have to hide? Maybe it's because of the guidance. I don't think it's necessarily because they want to ask that question. Like, everybody's a human being. It's a strange question to ask. But the perspective is that they want foreign nationals to be an open book, right? They want to feel some level of comfort that there's nothing to hide. So do publicize your social media. You can turn it on before entry. You come into the United States, and if you want to turn it off thereafter, that's kind of your own liberty to make that judgment call.
Okay. So the answer is yes. Make it public and make it private again if you want later on. All right. Also, Josiel, can you share email for a consult? The email is in the chat. Manifest Law has put it out. It's just help@manifestlaw.com. All right. Akshat, we are going to talk about your question now. So Akshat has kind of a two-part question. Akshat received an I-797B and not the change of status for H-1B. They came for masters. EAD ends on August 8th, 2026. So in about 8 or 9 months. My attorney suggested that I get the stamping done ASAP. What to do? And is it normal for a master's student to get consular processing and not change of status? So usually people go for change of status. I remember I did that when I switched from OPT to H-1B. For some reason, Akshat has not. And so, yeah, what to do right now?
So I think I know why Akshay didn't do the I-797C is because it's about using your remaining time on your OPT to elongate the total amount of time that you have in the United States, right? But I think the question of whether or not you want to exit the country and do the visa stamping actually depends on whether or not this changes, not even changes, sorry, this H-1B was filed before that September 21st shutdown, let's call it, right? From the 100K proclamation. The government has basically exempted people or approvals that are tied to filings that occurred prior to September 21st. So assuming that this was a cap season case from this past like lottery season, then you should have filed before June 30th anyway, and you shouldn't be impacted. And the 100K fee should not come up because even though it was approved for consular notification, it was based on an application that was filed prior to the cutoff date for this proclamation. So there shouldn't be a risk, but the one thing that I will say, Akshat, is that it's already risky enough to leave the country. Because even if you manage to get an appointment, let's say miraculously you get an appointment for January, right? There's nothing precluding the government from continuing to issue cancellations as they're trying to buy time to put in this policy or vetting procedure in place, right? And that is a different risk. It's not even a risk about, your H-1B or this proclamation or this questions. It's actually the risk of being stuck outside of the United States for a really long time and your company not willing to swallow the time that you are away for so long, even if it's not your fault. In this scenario, for business continuity purposes, I have been advising companies to consider letting us file an H-1B amendment. You're just essentially amending this existing H-1B, and instead of getting it approved as it is right now for consular notification, I'm going to gently ask the government to change it into a change of status. Please instead change Aksha status into this particular one to activate it domestically rather than abroad. Because honestly, you cannot at this time guarantee for a fact that that appointment is going to happen. You are in the best position when you're in the United States rather than outside of the United States.
Okay. Hopefully that answers your question, Akshat. If you have a quick follow-up, please ask it right away. Because we're ending almost in the last few minutes now. Now, Sid has a question Saj has a question on O-1 criteria again. Question: if I made multiple contributions to open source Git repos that are well known and used by 200,000 people, but I can't get letters from the owner stating my contribution was significant, can I still use this somehow?
That's tough because in my experience, you do need the repo owners to be involved, right? Because the repository is not yours. You contributed to something, but you don't hold ownership over it. You might be able to prove that you put parts of it, but let's say you can't get it from the repo owners. I think you can get it from the people who used it, right? If someone is willing to acknowledge that you were a significant contributor, and maybe not the owners, but someone out there in the general public in their company saw your work, absorbed it from GitHub, and established it or used it within their own product or their own tech stack or whatever, and they're willing to say how much your work helped them in the end product, that could be powerful. When it comes to significant contributions or original contributions as a category, it's a tough category. You really, really need to be able to prove that whatever you did was significant to the whole field. So you need to talk to a lot of people who you impacted, not necessarily the owners, but the owners are helpful for sure. I wish they would help you.
There's a question from Shri questions on traveling on the H-1B if time permits. Is that affected at all? Like, could I potentially travel internationally next year, maybe? Just curious. I guess a lot of people are just scared of leaving the country at this point. But if I think Shri has already done the stamping, which means they have a valid visa that's probably going to go on for another year or two. So is there any reason to not travel internationally when I don't have to get stamping?
I would just, if you already have a visa stamp, it is okay to travel. But during these tumultuous times, right? In a time where everything keeps moving. I know I keep saying because like I hate that I have to keep like going into this cycle of like being so conservative, right? I'm going to keep echoing into the chambers. The most legally defensible position to ever be in is actually in the United States. Because what is the one thing that the executive branch can unilaterally control without congressional intervention? The ability to enter the United States. Think about how they rolled out the 100K proclamation. It all had to do with an entry point, right? I am banning individuals from entering the country unless they show this 100K fee. They didn't say that every H-1B in the universe, even though the live stream said that, is going to pay the 100K fee. They said that you are banned from entering the United States unless you have this 100K fee paid, right? Look at all of the latest news. Travel ban. It's hard to challenge a travel ban, and they haven't challenged a travel ban. Why? Because the executive branch has the authority to do that. So whenever I counsel corporate clients, right, I actually tell them scale back the non-essential travel right now. Because for business continuity purposes, it's always better for your staff to be here rather than been stuck like 2,000 or 3,000 miles away, especially if you're in the manufacturing industry. That is devastating, beyond control. So I know you have a stamp, but every time you leave the country, you always run that risk that something's going to happen where you might not get back in time for the borders to close, because that is the first thing that's going to go in any administration.
Yeah, I'm out of country right now. I'm in India for the holidays, and I left with knowing that there is always a small concern that when I come back, there could be an issue. Maybe they've changed the process for O-1, who knows? So I knew that risk when I left, and I'm okay with that small level of risk that's always there. So I think it's a question of, are you okay with the risk?
Correct. A risk tolerance question. Like, I think it's just every single time I've talked to an employee, I tell them, like, this is the window of what can exist, right? If you are comfortable with taking that risk, and also to some extent when I talk to the company, like, if you're okay with that, then this is it. And it's also about contingency. I think it goes back to what I said earlier, Soundarya. It's kind of nowadays better for employees, for individuals to have their own resources or to come up with their own solutions when something negative happens, right? Don't rely unilaterally on your employer to figure it out. It comes much more powerfully from you if you're like, all right, this happened. I can't control that. I'm sorry that I got a cancellation. I'm out of the country for 6 months, but here's all the things that I think can help resolve it so that you will be willing to maintain my job for the next 6 months because I'm closer in time, or whatever the solution could be.
Yeah. Well, with that, we have come to the end of the webinar, and I don't see any more pressing questions from you guys. So hopefully that means we answered all of it, or at least as much as we could. Thank you so much, Nicole. And this is a QR code if you want to schedule a free consult with someone from Manifest. So scan it or email help@manifestlaw.com to schedule a free consultation, especially if you're aiming for O-1 and EB-1 and NIW visas right now. With that, we will see you in the new year after this, and happy holidays to everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Happy holidays, guys.